Deborah Mitford was the youngest of the 6 infamous Mitford sisters. Unlike several of her older siblings, she was uncontroversial and instead led a quieter life. Yet this all changed after a series of tragic events led to her becoming the Duchess of Devonshire in 1950 and subsequently a multi-millionaire. Join me as we explore her story. Deborah Vivian Freeman Mitford, who would be known as Deborah by her family and later her in-laws, was born on the 31st of May 1920 at Asthall Manor in Oxfordshire. She came from a notable English family. Her father was David Bertram Ogilvy Freeman Mitford, 2nd Baron Ruysdael, while her mother was Sydney Bowles, the daughter of a British MP and publishing magnate. She was the youngest of the Mitford clan and had 5 older sisters born between 1904 and 1917, Nancy, Pamela, Diana, Unity and Jessica, and 1 brother Tom. Her childhood was complex. Her parents had wanted a second son, and so she was dismissed to a large extent. They were also very eccentric, and their marriage was extremely strained in Deborah's younger years, eventually collapsing altogether in the late 1930s and early 1940s. As the youngest of the 6 sisters, she was overshadowed and teased extensively by her older siblings, though they had an affection for her, which is typical when you're the youngest member of a large family. Growing up, young Deborah would spend her Saturdays fox hunting, while on Sundays she would ice skate. She had little formal schooling, instead she was primarily taught by a governess and various tutors. Deborah was still only a child when Diana began seeing Oswald Mosley, the leader of the recently formed British Union of Fascists in 1932. The family was soon drawn into the upper echelons of European fascism, with Unity essentially moving to Germany in the mid-1930s when she was barely an adult, to take up a position as one of Adolf Hitler's closest female confidants. Consequently, when she was still just a teenager, Deborah had the strange experience of dining with Adolf Hitler in Munich, though her recollection of the event many years later emphasized that there was little by way of open conversation. Hitler didn't speak English, and Unity had to translate. By the mid-1930s, the Mitford family's politics were taking a toll on relations between different members of it. While Diana and Unity became closely aligned with British and German fascism, and were joined in that political outlook by their mother Sydney and brother Tom, Jessica, the second youngest sister, was a communist, while Nancy was appalled by Diana's associations in particular. The girl's father, David, was also opposed to German fascism, and the tensions this created with his wife eventually led to their final separation. Deborah, and also to some extent her older sister Pamela, both of whom shared a love for all things rural throughout their lives, became the neutral members of the family, maintaining good relations for the most part with all members, where others had bitter fallings out, notably between Nancy and Diana, and between Jessica and Unity. Deborah later wrote of her sisters, "I do not share Diana's fascist views, but my love for her overcame this side of her character, and Unity was always the odd one out." The British author and biographer Selina Hastings wrote that Deborah was by far the most balanced of all the sisters. She was down to earth. This role as peacemaker and arbitrator made Deborah, who was just 19 at the time that the Second World War broke out, the daughter who headed off with her mother to Europe late in 1939 when Unity showed up in Switzerland with a bullet in her head, having attempted to take her own life on the 3rd of September, the day Britain declared war on Germany. Deborah and her mother chaperoned Unity back to England, but she never recovered from the brain damage which occurred when she shot herself, and died in the late 1940s when the bullet, which could not be removed, changed position in her head. Deborah would remain a stalwart defender of her sister's actions for decades thereafter, clashing with media and even her in-laws when her sister's dubious association with the leaders of Nazi Germany were raised. This aside, Deborah had no affinity for any of National Socialism's political views, but was rather a traditional British conservative throughout her long life, though one who flirted along with her husband with a new liberal movement in the 1980s, as we will see. Her defense of Unity was based solely on family loyalty, and long after the war Deborah remained on good terms with all of her surviving siblings. Not long after her trip to Switzerland to fetch Unity back from war-torn Europe, Deborah agreed to marry Andrew Cavendish, a younger son of Edward Cavendish, 10th Duke of Devonshire, one of the most senior peers of Britain. They were married in the Priory Church of St Bartholomew the Great in West Smithfield in London in 1941. Shortly afterwards, their first child, a boy called Mark, was born on the 14th of November 1941, but he died just minutes after his birth. As we will see, further children came in the years that followed, but Deborah's natal history was complicated. So too was married life. Her brother-in-law William, the heir to the dukedom, was killed in September 1944 while leading a division of the Coldstream Guards, the oldest regiment in the British Army. This occurred in Belgium following the Allied invasion of France and the opening of a Western Front in the summer of that year. William, or Billy as he was known, had married Kathleen Kick Kennedy just 4 months prior. She was the sister of the future president and would face her own tragic end. Despite their brief marriage, this connection placed Deborah in the Kennedy circle, and she and her husband would later be guests of President John F. Kennedy in Washington. With his brother's passing, Andrew became the heir designate, and when his father also died unexpectedly of a heart attack in the early winter of 1950, Andrew succeeded as the 11th Duke of Devonshire. With this, Deborah, who would not have expected to acquire such a title when she married Andrew in 1941, became Duchess of Devonshire. As Duchess of Devonshire, Deborah became the lady of one of Britain's most prized stately homes, Chatsworth House. The Chatsworth estate had first passed into the ownership of the Cavendish family back in 1549 when Sir William Cavendish, a prominent royal official, purchased it. His descendant, William Cavendish, 4th Earl of Devonshire and subsequently 1st Duke of Devonshire, began building the modern house in 1687, which eventually became a sprawling 5-storey 81,000 square metre abode with 300 rooms. His descendant, the 4th Duke, later married Lady Charlotte Boyle, the sole heiress to the vast Boyle estate in Ireland, which brought enormous wealth to the family. Thus, Chatsworth House had flourished as one of the great centres of the British aristocracy in the 18th and 19th centuries. Deborah transformed it into a modern stately home during the 54-year period that she held the title of Duchess alongside her husband as Duke. It was an uphill struggle. Despite the family's historic wealth, they were heavily indebted by the time Andrew and Deborah became Duke and Duchess in 1950. Some £7 million, the equivalent of well over £200 million in today's money, was owed to the government. This was due to extensive wealth taxes which were imposed in Britain after the Second World War and the death duties charged on the passing of the 10th Duke in 1950 on the vast Chatsworth estate. Many of Andrew and Deborah's advisors at this stage believed the financial situation to be unfixable and advised carving up the Chatsworth estate and selling chunks of it, but they took another approach. They decided to sell many valuable works of art, as well as a second 16th century palace, Hardwick Hall. The couple was determined to redevelop Chatsworth and turn it into one of the largest tourist centres in northern England. When Andrew and Deborah took this decision, Chatsworth House itself was run down, as the Dukes of Devonshire had not used it as their primary residence for many years. Instead, it had been leased out as a private girls' boarding school for a time. Accordingly, the house had to be restored. Deborah became the chief decorator in the restoration process, overseeing the repainting and repair of the family rooms and renovating many of the sprawling common areas. By 1959, the house and main grounds were sufficiently well restored to move in. This was just the beginning of a long process. The grounds immediately surrounding the house were transformed by Deborah, with large gardens planted to begin a cottage industry of sorts. The result many years later was a self-sufficient estate, and tourists visiting Chatsworth House today can eat in a restaurant where most of the produce comes from the surrounding farm and gardens. This was expanded later to open Chatsworth Farm Shop. Deborah was fully immersed in the country life. She had dogs, horses and livestock, enjoyed shooting, and hosted a variety of agricultural shows and equestrian events. Eventually, in the 1990s, she even began publishing books on the farm and gardens, notably The Garden at Chatsworth in 1999 and the Chatsworth Cookery Book in 2003. This was just one element of the rejuvenation of Chatsworth. Chatsworth House sits at the centre of a 35,000-acre estate, on which are to be found many important tourist sites, notably the Tudor mansion of Bess of Hardwicke, a famed companion of Queen Elizabeth I. Beyond this, the scenic beauty of the Peak District, in which the estate is located, makes the estate a considerable draw for tourists in northern England. Deborah was front and central to this development in the early years, even manning the ticket office at the house when it first became a tourist site. She also oversaw the establishment and redevelopment of several hotels on or adjoining the estate in Baslow and other villages between the house and the town of Chesterfield. As a result of all of this work, by the 1990s Chatsworth had become one of the most popular tourist destinations in England. This is a substantial part of Deborah's legacy as Duchess. Today, over 500,000 visitors arrive to Chatsworth every year, putting it on the same level as the Tower of London and the Royal Albert Hall. While Chatsworth House became a resounding success under Deborah's stewardship, her family life was strained in many ways. Andrew was repeatedly unfaithful, and this came to public attention when he was called to testify at a burglary trial, in the course of which he was forced to admit that he had been with another woman on the night in question. Deborah tolerated his infidelities for many years, as well as his borderline alcoholism, which he openly wrote about. She eventually confronted this in the 1980s, telling her husband that it was her or the booze. In her memoir she states, "For 2 decades until the day he died, he never had another drink." Deborah also maintained a public show of solidarity, campaigning with him in the 1980s when he became involved with the short-lived Social Democratic Party, a pro-Europe centrist party largely formed out of former members of the Labour Party who were disaffected by its drift to the left at the time. Asked years later why she stayed with her husband, she stated it was because he wasn't boring. Andrew and Deborah's position as parents was also difficult. After the death at birth of Mark in 1941, 2 healthy children, Emma and Peregrine, were born in 1943 and 1944, but thereafter Deborah suffered a miscarriage in 1946 and 2 children who died shortly after they were born in 1947 and 1953. The tragedy of having lost 4 children at a time when such levels of infant mortality were becoming unusual owing to medical advances was somewhat alleviated when a healthy child, whom they named Sophia, was born in 1957. By the late 1990s, Chatsworth House had become a tremendous success, and the Devonshires were able to engage in a wide array of philanthropic activity. For her actions in contributing to the Royal Collection Trust, the largest art collection in the world, Deborah was made a Dame Commander of the Royal Victorian Order by Queen Elizabeth II in 1999. In 2004, Andrew died at 84 years of age, and his and Deborah's only surviving son, Peregrine, succeeded as 12th Duke of Devonshire, a position which he still holds. Following this, Deborah moved out of Chatsworth to make way for her son, and moved back to the old rectory on the Chatsworth estate, where she had lived in the 1950s with her husband. The Cavendish family have been repeatedly featured on the Sunday Times Rich List, and in 2023 it was estimated that their wealth amounted to £905 million, a result of their extensive land holdings and also investment in hotel chains abroad. Deborah's business acumen had not only saved the dukedom from the financial difficulties it had been in during the 1950s, but had made the Cavendishes once again one of England's wealthiest aristocratic families. Deborah died on the 24th of September 2014 at 94 years of age. By that time, she had been the last surviving Mitford sister for over a decade, Diana having died in 2003 and Pamela and Jessica before her in the mid-1990s. At her funeral, over 600 staff, hundreds of members of the public, and even members of the royal family lined the route from Chatsworth House to St. Peter's Church at Enza, where she was buried. Elvis, her favourite musician, was played at the funeral. Deborah Mitford, Dowager Duchess of Devonshire, was survived by her son and 2 daughters, as well as 8 grandchildren and 18 great-grandchildren. It was a fitting end to the eccentric and controversial Mitford sisters. Thank you everyone so much for watching this video on Deborah Mitford, the Duchess of Devonshire. I hope you found it interesting. Let me know what you thought of her life down below in the comments, and if you have any other suggestions, also be sure to leave them in the comments. I've already covered the lives of all of her sisters, and even of Kathleen Kennedy, who was mentioned in the video. Anyways, I hope you guys are subscribed and the notifications turned on to get all my videos as soon as I upload them. Anyway, that's all from me, so I'll see all of you in the next Forgotten Life. Thanks.